Hello everybody, Candle Genius here, and we are going to make candles using American Soy Organics Millennium Wax. Let's get started. Here's a scoop today. We're going to make 2 candles. We're going to make one batch big enough for 2 candles. We're going to pour one hot, and then we're going to let it cool and see what happens. And then we're going to pour one the right way with Millennium Wax and see what the difference is between the two. But let me first put out a little disclaimer. This is an amazing all-natural wax. It's amazing, and it can make the best candles that you have ever made. But I gotta be honest, it's not my favorite. And this is why. Because you need to be very, very patient to make this product work the way that you want. But if you're patient and you're willing to take the time, it's going to be the best candle you've ever made. It holds color well, it distributes fragrance well, cold throw and hot throw, it burns beautifully. It's a great, great product. I actually really like it when I'm only making a couple candles at a time. But if you're doing big batch type stuff, that's where we turn to the Freedom Wax, because you can just kind of pour that one hot and get a great result. This one we're going to pour cool, and we're going to talk about that as we make candles. I'm going to do 30 ounces total. And I'm going to go 10% fragrance load on this one. So in order to do that, let's do some quick math. 30 ounces, 10% of that is 3 ounces. So I got to leave room enough for 3 ounces here, which means I'm going to put 27 fluid ounces of wax. Come on, baby. 0.1 ounce short, of course. Don't worry, we'll find it. We'll find it. 27. All right. Because each candle is going to hold 15 ounces, that's my goal. And I'm doing 2 candles. We need 30 ounces total. And I have a few fragrances here to choose from. I have cashmere and cedar. That's one of my favorites. So is cedarwood and fir, so that's going to type one. And whitewood rose is another one. Well, I know I'm going to use red today to color these. Not green. Red. And because of that, I'm going to choose the rose fragrance. So let's give this a little bit of a shake. This is a 4-ounce bottle, available at soybeads.com. And we're going to take this to 30 ounces now. You probably shouldn't have to shake it, but just as a habit, why wouldn't you, right? Just in case any fragrance notes tended to migrate, but the fragrances should be mixed appropriately in such a way that everything is in suspension and it works great. But it's a great habit to get into. Just give it a little shake. Why not? Why not? It's more fun that way anyway. So now we have 30 ounces of wax and fragrance combination here. And I'm going to stir it using my trusty chopsticks. But here's an interesting thing. We're going to color this. And there are some general guidelines that we should follow when coloring wax just in general, right? We like to use liquid dye. This is not food dye, by the way. Food dye is a water-based. This is an oil-based. So it's got to be specifically a dye for making candles, liquid dye for making candles. They do this in solids too, but then you got to melt it. I love the liquid because it's so easy to use. But here's a rule of thumb. I have 30 ounces of wax in here. I'm using red. I can get a nice deep red color, probably deeper than the color of my shirt, by putting more red dye in it. But how much is the right amount? Dye will clog your wick if you use too much. So a rule of thumb on that is you don't use more than 1 drop of dye per ounce of product. So I have 30 ounces in here, which means it's a giant no-no to use more than 30 drops of any color dye in this batch. Super easy. That's just a quick, easy rule to follow. But if I use 30, that'd be a very deep red. I kind of want something a little more pink. So I'm just gonna take a guess here and say I think 5 drops is probably a good amount to use. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Also consider when you're using this liquid dye, this stuff it gets everywhere. Like, you do not want to spill this on anything. If you do, I'm just looking at my hands because I'll get it in my hands, next thing you know it's on my face, and that's a problem. I'm gonna use 2 sticks. By the way, if you do get this die on your countertop, as an example, it will not come off in general. One tip that I've learned, one trick that I've learned for that is actually fragrance oil, because dye is meant to blend with fragrance oil. That means fragrance oil will absolutely cut that dye. And so if I got a little bit on the table, I could use some fragrance oil to literally just clean that up. As a matter of fact, it would look like a stain until I use fragrance oil. And then you can use like an alcohol or something like that to remove the fragrance oil later. So just little tips on how to use a dye. So when I'm mixing fragrance and dye, the important thing is what gets them to blend? How do we get them to blend together? Well, it's energy, and energy can come in multiple ways, but in candle making, energy comes in heat, and it comes in stirration or agitation. So in this case, I've put it in 160-degree wax, and I'm stirring it, but I'm not using like a super heavy-duty blender because I don't want to aerate the wax. Aerating the wax can cause air bubbles. Air bubbles cause irregularity in your candles. They also cause fat bloom, and fat bloom is just a scientific thing that natural waxes do when they crystallize, when they harden. If you've ever seen chocolate that gets kind of a chalky look to it, that's fat bloom. It's a natural thing that natural waxes do, and this is a natural product. So I'm going to use my taser here. We're going to see how warm is this guy. 142 degrees. I guess we got a camera overhead there. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to wick this guy. We'll put 3 wicks in him. Why not? These are CD7, some call them Stabilo 7s. I like this wick for these jars. 7 is not a very big Stabilo or CD, but what this one does is it tends to curl over as it burns. It keeps the wick in the flame so that it fully combusts, and then you get less of that mushrooming effect that you sometimes get with the natural waxes. So we're gonna do 3 wicks in this guy. We have these pretty fancy little wick stickums. You might have your own names for them. We're just going to call them wick stickums. The CD7 or Stabilo 7, again, they're the same thing, is a great wick to put 3 in for this wax. I like it. They make bigger ones. If you're going to do 2 wick, you can do that too. So I'm ready to pour this. However, before I do that, how am I going to hold these wicks up? Here's my issue. Pretty common bow tie wick holders, but check this out. Like, it's not big enough, right? I could probably stretch the bend out of this and just make it a little longer like that, but it's still tricky. So we're going to let's see what we can find to do. The wax is cooling a little bit, right? But we need something different to do here. Well, you know what? Lucky me, I've got some fresh chopsticks. Let's try that. There's a lot of ways you can do this. Maybe we'll try a couple methods here. Those clothespins go. There we go. Let's try this one here. Let's try this for this guy. Let's try maybe. What do you think? Some people wrap them. I don't love wrapping these things because they tend to come unwound, right? This isn't a terrible way to do it. In fact, maybe I'll do one like that just for fun. I like pulling it tight and then putting a clothespin on it. That can work, right? But in that one, like, what if that clothespin is now stuck in my wax? That could be a thing. So here's another method I like to use sometimes. Just a regular old drinking straw. If I fold it in half like that, just put a little slit in it. And thread that through that little monster. That can be another great way to hold a wick. So we're just going to use this messy little wick holding. I don't even know what you call this. It's a disaster is what it is. But hey, it's disaster with a purpose, right? We're learning something. We're just getting creative with this thing. We'll try something else on the other one. Okay, so we got our wicks glued in. They're held down. I've got now 138 degrees is my temperature here. Got a little bit of candle mess on my table. Candle makers make messes, is what we do. I'm gonna give this one more stir. Again, I don't wanna over stir it, but we've got heat in there, right? That's a hot wax. We've got a little bit of agitation. And I see that the color is fully, it's not streaky at all, which tells me that the dye and the fragrance are equally blended in. And then now I'm just gonna pour this in here. I'm gonna use my eyeballs instead of putting it on the scale, so they might not be exactly perfect, but this is the first one, okay? We're gonna pour this one hot. Avoid my clothespin. My goal here is a single pour in the candle. Now, you could pour Millennium hot. I'm going to guess the result is not going to be the same as pouring it cool, because we really, really recommend that you pour this cool. And when I say cool, what does that mean? Are you using your thermometer? Sure, you're using your thermometer just to kind of check the status. How is it? We're 136 degrees right now. I like to see this poured at, I'll say 111 degrees, but more important than the thermometer is the look of the wax. You'll see this start to get hazy, and when it gets hazy, what's happening is the wax itself is beginning to crystallize. And when I say crystallize, I mean it's just hardening. So there's particles in there that are saying, okay, you know what, I'm kind of done being all melty and stuff. I'm ready just to relax and be a solid. And that happens. You'll see this wax start to turn a little bit hazy at about, I'll say 100, it's going to get under 115 degrees, and it depends on the fragrance a little bit. But we're literally just watching for that wax to become hazy, and then we're going to pour it in this jar. So while we're waiting for that, I'm going to go ahead and prepare this jar for a single pour, cool. Same prep as last time, wick stickies. Okay, so wicks are in. I'm going to take a moment and I'm just going to stir this slowly, just to make sure everything stays blended. Sometimes fragrances are made up of top, middle, or heart notes, and then the base notes. And fragrances can, once they get in that warm wax and they get diluted, right? So what we talked about, why do we shake this? It should be a homogeneous mixture in there, but the fact is it's made up of some lighter notes, some middle notes, some base notes. And we find that when you put this into a hot wax, it kind of relaxes them a little bit, and they say, well, we've been kind of hanging out together for a while, but I might be willing to go check out my friends on top. So the lighter notes, or the top notes as we call them in the fragrance world, will often migrate to the top of the jar. The base notes, which are your vanillas, your tree barks, just your heavier crystal structures, are actually heavier, and they will literally fall to the bottom of that candle. And then your middle notes will kind of rest between those. And so what we find is, and we might see it here, we poured this hot and we just let it sit. I would dare say that this will actually have a different cold throw than this one does when we're done. Maybe only slightly, but there's a very good chance that the lighter top notes will come to the top, the base notes will fall to the bottom if you don't see it, and the middle notes will rest in the middle, where we're going to pour this one cool, where it begins to crystallize. And it's those crystals that, in a sense, lock those fragrances and keep them from migrating up and down. So we should get a truer fragrance with the cooler pour than we do with the hotter pour. We're going to find out when we get done. It's a little bit subjective sometimes, but we do know it's true that fragrance notes can indeed split and separate once they're put in the warm wax. So because of that, we're going to, from time to time, make sure we're stirring this carefully, keeping things from hardening on the side or sticking to the sidewall of the container. And now we're going to tie these wicks up. It doesn't always have to be pretty. If you're making one candle by yourself, obviously if you're making a bunch of candles, this is not going to be the way you're going to want to do it. Right? So I'll take these guys, who are very, very handy in most cases of candle making. This jar's too big, so we'll get them out of here. Now, one problem I have with this is I can't really tell if I'm perfectly centered on those. The beauty is with 3 wicks on this guy, especially if you're making a gift or something like that, If they're not perfect, they're still going to burn amazingly, because each of these CD7 wicks is just going to do its job of creating a pool around it. It should melt perfectly. So if you're a hobbyist making candles, and again, I talked a little bit about why you might want to use Millennium, and again, Millennium is different because it is, well, it's all natural. It has some emulsifiers in it that hold the color well, that hold the fragrance well. It does some things really well. However, it also has a fair amount of, I'll say, shrink in it. And when Millennium is cooling, this wax will cool down to 107 degrees, and it'll kick back up to 113-ish as it's cooling, and that's when we'll start to see it crystallize a little bit. That's why we can't get too excited about the temperature. Oh, if it hits 107, oh my goodness, it's getting cool. It will actually come back up before it actually truly begins to fall, and that's just part of the crystallization process. If you've ever used plaster of Paris, you kind of know what I'm talking about. As it cures and cools, it actually sheds the heat molecules, and as it's shedding the heat molecules, it feels warmer to the touch. It's a lot like that as this sets. So because of that, we just gotta be patient. We gotta use our eyeballs, but that all takes time. And the result, however, is that by waiting and waiting for it to crystallize, the fragrance will hold in suspension, the color will hold in suspension. You'll see less frosting with this wax than you will with many other soy waxes on the market. But you just gotta be patient, which is sometimes hard to do. So now is the time. Stay close, don't go too far. Great time to grab your local newspaper, read through the classifieds, maybe read the funny pages. If you're like me, Duolingo. Pick up a language while you wait. I'm learning Spanish right now. Okay, so we're going to pause this video for a moment. We're going to come back here when this wax is a little closer to ready. In the meantime, we're just going to keep on stirring. So we'll see you in a few. All right, so as you maybe can see from the overhead camera there, we are turning hazy. And as you look in the front camera at this guy that we poured hot, he's beginning to get hazy around the edges, but this is why it's important, right? We want that haze all the way through there, which means that crystallizing is happening throughout the wax. In this case, we'll look at the one that we poured hot. The crystals, the harder crystals, they kind of migrate to the outside where they can just kind of relax and, like I said, like stop being a liquid and just say, look, I just want to just chill out and just sit here. I just want to veg. And I can do that on the outside because it's cooler on the outside, where the core has a higher temperature here. It's keeping things warmer. So again, those harder components that have a higher melting temperature tend to migrate out, and that's the secret to why you want to make sure you're stirring this one throughout the process. So again, I'm looking at this, and you can almost see there's maybe even a texture on the top of it. The texture, by the way, is not a bad thing in your candle, because that texture actually creates more surface area, and more surface area creates more cold throw as your candles are, so I'll say, not burning. They're not burning yet, right? The cold throw is what your customer smells, or your friend smells, or you smell when you take the lid off and get your first smell. So let's take a look at the temperature of this. This wax was 100, well, it's 105 right now. So it was actually about 105 10 minutes ago. So the temperature has gone up a little bit, and then it's come back down. This is a great time for us to pour this candle. So I'm going to pour it here in this jar. And you'll compare it to the one next to it. Again, what's happening? This guy is allowed to crystallize however he wants, and pieces of this candle are going to float out. The fragrance is going to not float out, but the top notes will come to the top, the base notes will come to the bottom, your harder components will come to the sides. Here we're holding everything in suspension. You can see it. We call that a slurry, because while it's mostly liquid, it's got a bunch of solids in there. Super, super important that when you pour this candle, you're on a solid table that's not going to wiggle or move. This one, by the way, will wiggle or move. So I'm going to leave that right there, and I'm going to walk away. And literally within half an hour or so, this candle is going to be solid enough to just move wherever, no problem. This guy will probably still be liquid. So, can I, Candle Genius, tell the difference between the hot pour and the cold pour from yesterday? And here's what I'm going to show. I'm just going to walk you through it, right? I can absolutely tell the difference. So can you already. But let's talk about why. And if we look at the overhead cam, I'm going to look at these here. Color-wise, both jars actually don't look too dissimilar. I would say, if anything, the one on this side maybe does look a little darker, a little richer. There's a few inconsistencies in this guy right here. Sidewall adhesion, this one appears to be fully pulled away. It's not fully pulled away. We call these wet spots. They're areas where, I don't know if you can see that or not, but the sidewall, the wax is here to the sidewall here, not here. And that's called a wet spot. It's not really a wet spot, it just appears to be that way. Sometimes we talk about putting too much fragrance in, and that does actually cause like moisture, like oil coming up. That's not what we're seeing here at all. That's just the term for the wet spot. I'm looking for fat bloom. The bottom of my jar does have a little bit of wax on it. That happens sometimes. So one of the things with soy candles is we see fat bloom sometimes, and that's called frosting in the candle world. I don't see any of that here in this one. But take a look at the top there. You got kind of a flaky top. It's a little bit irregular. Pretty normal for soy to do that. There's ways that you can resolve that. We'll talk about that in a later video. But let's compare that to this other candle here. Now, in this case here, I can see that we have super uniform. You see, this actually looks glossier because of how the wax interacts behind the glass. How that glass reflects the product is definitely enhanced. There's a spot right here. This is the only one, and this is what I'd like to see. It has not been 24 hours yet since we poured this, and this is the only part that is still adhered to the sidewall of the glass. Now, I expect it will pull away completely over the next 24, 48, even 72 hours. Typically 4 days. After 4 days, what this looks like is what it will look like forever. I expect that will pull away. However, even if it doesn't, and you're the type of person that puts a label on the front of your jar, that's where you put it, to cover that little spot, because everything else on the sidewall of this looks perfect. The sidewall adhesion looks great. Look at the bottom here again. Fat bloom wise, I don't see any on either of these, but we do have a darker, more uniform color on this one. Net result, this is the candle that we poured cool, and this is the one that we poured hot. And those are the differences between those two. Now, the top here, could we heat this with a heat gun and fix that a little bit? Perhaps. It's generally never perfect. Best case scenario would have been maybe to top this off with a layer of wax, maybe an hour after it was poured, or after it was hardened. But here's the one that we poured cool. One pour, pretty much zero shrink. You can see that there. But looking at the porous top, it looks almost like a cement kind of a texture. And that's because we poured it so it was crystallized and everything was in suspension. I poured this, I believe it was 105, 106 degrees. You could actually pour it a little bit warmer and get a little smoother top on that. I just waited a little longer than maybe you would want to, but there's one massive advantage of this, and that is that porous nature in the top of that is actually extra surface area on your candle. What's extra surface area mean? Well, it means you have better cold throw with this candle. So when you put a lid on it, and you put it on a shelf somewhere, you gift it to somebody, and that lid is opened, and whoever is the recipient of this lovely candle gift, they're going to smell that thing and they're going to get great cold fragrance throw. So there's a result. There's a difference between pouring Millennium hot and pouring Millennium cool. And you can play with that in any way. Again, I poured this one about 105, 106 degrees Fahrenheit. Maybe I hit the next one at 111-ish or so. And I might get a little smoother top if that's what you're after. But that's the difference. Happy experimenting, and thanks for joining us for this one. We'll see you next time.